Whenever we get on a plane, it's this huge act of trust, right? We trust the pilots, the engineers, the people who built the plane. We trust the entire system to be completely obsessed with safety. But what happens when that trust gets shaken? A series of terrifying events at one of the world's most famous companies has done exactly that. That sound you just heard, that's the real-time audio from Alaska Airlines Flight 1282. It was just minutes into its flight when a whole chunk of the plane, a door plug, which is basically a panel where an extra emergency exit could go, just blew out. That single moment lays out the massive stakes of the story and the absolute terror for everyone on that flight. So, let's talk about the incident that put Boeing right back in the spotlight. It all went down on January 5th, 2024. The plane is climbing, it's at 16,000 feet, and then the unthinkable happens. And the cause? Well, it was something so simple it's almost unbelievable. 4. That's it. That's the number of bolts that were supposed to be holding that door plug in place on the Boeing 737 MAX 9. And when the National Transportation Safety Board investigated, they found that all 4 of them were missing. They weren't loose, they weren't defective, they just weren't there. Just imagine that for a second. A gaping hole suddenly appears in the side of your plane, and the air just explodes out of the cabin. It was incredibly, incredibly lucky that no one was sitting right next to that hole and that the plane wasn't any higher. It was a miracle for sure, but a miracle that should never have been needed in the first place. So you have to ask, right? How does a company that was once so legendary for its engineering, people used to have a saying, if it's not Boeing, I'm not going, how do they get to a point where planes are literally rolling off the assembly line with critical bolts missing? Well, a lot of people who followed this story point to one single event. A merger, way back in 1997. The before and after picture here is pretty shocking. Before 97, you had the old Boeing. It was all about the engineers. They were based in Seattle, right next to the factories. Then they merge with their rival, McDonnell Douglas, and everything changes. Suddenly, it's a profit-first, Wall Street-first culture. They even moved the headquarters to Chicago, far from the engineers. The joke inside the company was that McDonnell Douglas, the smaller company, had somehow managed to buy Boeing with Boeing's own money. And get this wasn't some slow, accidental drift. It was totally on purpose. This quote is from Harry Stone's cipher, the guy who took over as president. He flat out says the goal was to make Boeing run like a business rather than a great engineering firm. For critics, this is the smoking gun. It's a confession that the company's core values were being intentionally replaced, and that shift would end up having deadly consequences. And that new mindset, well, it led straight to one of the most tragic disasters in modern corporate history. It led to the development of the 737 MAX, and ultimately to the deaths of 346 people. See, Boeing was in a race with its competitor, Airbus, and it rushed the 737 MAX to market. The problem was they put bigger, more powerful engines on an old plane design, which messed with the aerodynamics. Their quick and dirty fix was a piece of software called MCAS. On paper, all it was supposed to do was nudge the plane's nose down to make it feel like the old 737s, preventing a stall. But in reality, it was a hidden time bomb. This chain of failure is just devastating. The whole reason MCAS existed was to save money by avoiding expensive pilot retraining. To cut even more corners, they designed this incredibly powerful system to rely on data from just one single sensor. And the worst part? They deliberately hid it from the pilots. It wasn't in the flight manual. They didn't even know it existed. So when that one sensor failed, MCAS took over and forced 2 separate planes into nosedives that the pilots couldn't escape. Those 2 MAX crashes were a global wake-up call. But were they just a horrible one-off tragedy? Or was it a symptom of a much deeper disease in the company? Well, all the evidence suggests that the MAX disaster and that Alaska Airlines flight are not isolated incidents. They're part of a long, disturbing pattern of failure. Just look at this timeline. This isn't something that happened overnight. For more than a decade, there have been these huge, flashing red lights. A 5-foot hole tearing open in the roof of a plane mid-flight. A supplier caught faking safety certifications for years. An engine breaking apart after takeoff. This was never about just one plane or one piece of software. It was about the entire system breaking down. And when you dig into the details from whistleblowers and official reports, it gets even worse. We're talking about workers finding debris, like tools and metal shavings, left inside brand new planes, right next to critical wiring. Hundreds of aircraft delivered with loose parts. There was even a senior manager who got caught trying to use a dented part he pulled out of a scrap bin. And for the 737 MAX, some of the critical engineering was outsourced to temporary contractors who were being paid just $9 an hour. So you're probably thinking, wait a minute, where was the government in all this? Isn't there an agency, the FAA, whose entire job is to stop this from happening? Well, that's where the story gets really murky. Money talks, right? In just the last 4 years, Boeing and its key part supplier have spent over $65 million on lobbying and campaign donations. That kind of money buys a lot of influence in Washington. It helps you push for weaker regulations and faster approvals, all to keep the stock price up. And the result is a system that seems to protect the industry more than it protects us, the passengers. For years, the FAA, which was already underfunded, started letting manufacturers, like Boeing, do a lot of their own safety inspections. This is a massive conflict of interest. It's like letting an athlete be their own referee. Boeing was basically allowed to grade its own homework, and nobody was surprised when they gave themselves an A+. And if you want to know what some people inside the company thought about this cozy relationship, well, this quote from a former employee says it all. They said their own planes were designed by clowns, who in turn are supervised by monkeys. They felt like they were explaining complex safety issues to regulators who didn't even have the technical background to understand them. It was, in their words, as pointless as dogs watching TV. So that brings us to the big question, the one that really matters now. After all of this, after prioritizing profits, weakening its own legendary engineering culture, and influencing its own regulators, can Boeing ever really get our trust back? And this is an ancient history. A brand new report from February 2024, that's after the Alaska Airlines door plug blew off, found there's still a huge disconnect between the bosses and the workers on the factory floor. Employees are still afraid to report safety problems because they fear they'll be punished for it. That is the exact opposite of what you need for a safe airline industry. You see, the gold standard in aviation is what's called a just safety culture. It's a simple but powerful idea. Create a system where anyone, from the top CEO to the newest mechanic, can raise their hand and report a problem without any fear of being blamed. That's how you find the root cause of an issue and actually fix it for good. And by all accounts, that is precisely what's been missing at Boeing for a very long time. So we're left with this final, really tough question. Is this just a story about one bad company? Or is it about a whole system that rewards profit and stock prices over everything else, including human safety? When the entire system is set up this way, who's really to blame? And are we willing to accept that in the race for bigger profits, lives are being gambled away?